They're keeping you in touch with local leaders.
All that made a difference. We're in a great position today because of the actions we took.
And they're talking to national figures.
I love talking to you guys. It's great radio.
Marcus and Kurt are the only morning show giving you a connection to people and issues that matter from a local perspective. This is The Morning Drive with Marcus and Kurt.
Welcome back to The Morning Drive. Marcus J. McGowan is here for Kurt, and joining us in studio this morning is Andrew Brown, Essex Junction's Board of Trustees President. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning, Marcus. Good morning, Jamie.
Thanks so much for coming on in. So much to talk about. But let's not start with talking about separation, shall we? Let's talk about something else. In the news recently, there was an incident on Pearl Street. Apparently 3 individuals got into a fight. The police have admitted that their process, their procedures were, the officers involved did nothing wrong based on their policies and procedures. But Chief Hogue has said, we need to correct this so this type of handling of a situation doesn't happen again. What are your thoughts, not necessarily on the situation, but what the chief said? And will the trustees be holding the chief and the police department accountable for having put this situation into play where you question the motives of the Essex Police Department because they gave a citation to a BIPOC member of the community and did not give citations to 2 white individuals who were involved in this? Now, it's not to say who's guilty, who's not guilty. That's not about that. It's about what it looked like and not doing proper investigation before giving out those citations. So what are the trustees going to do in response to this situation?
And my understanding as well with that, Marcus, is there's videotape of the incident in question that pretty clearly showed who was at fault. That did not get reviewed until after the original individual was charged with a crime.
Right.
That then had to be later dropped. It's frankly quite the unfortunate situation that happened. I can't imagine what the Williams family is going through, and at an individual level, I can't imagine what he's going through. And I don't blame him for not accepting the apology. I can understand that if somebody harms and wrongs you, wanting to have an apology from the person that harmed you and not necessarily just the supervisor of the supervisor. So where do we need to go is we as a board of trustees need to talk about the situation. And I don't want to jump ahead of the board, but I do feel that this is one of those moments when we really need to have that conversation with the select board about things that have happened in our community and how we can make sure this doesn't happen again. Regardless of who you are, no one should have to go through that. No one should have to be called names that are harmful to any individual or any group, and be assaulted, have your ear bitten, and then be charged with a crime.
Yeah.
So how we go forward from here, I think, is really through that advocacy with the town select board to make sure that we've done what we can to prevent this from happening to any of our residents ever again.
And that's been an important thing that I've heard from you and from others on the trustees about the relationship with the Essex Police Department, not just moving forward, but right now. That is important, that the trustees have that ability to communicate with the chief and also be a part of improving the police department in a way. And because, again, you are the representatives for your constituency, and the chief could speak to all 10,000 village residents, but he has 5 people right now who he could speak to and hear clearly the voices of the village residents from.
Absolutely, Marcus. And I think I mentioned this the last time I was on the air about how last July we had been told by the town select board that we were not welcome to sit at the table with them to hear from members of our own community about concerns regarding racial justice and policing. We were told, in my paraphrasing, to go sit at the kid table while the adults have the conversation. If we'd like, we can participate as members of the public, but not within our official role as a board of trustees for the village. And that was so incredibly insulting. To try and take us away from being able to be a part of that conversation is also where in these separation conversations we need to make sure we get to a good place where we're not just seeing this revolving pattern, this revolving door occurring.
And since you brought up separation and we're talking about the police, I mean, one of the things that I heard most often from residents, and we remember what that referendum item that was on the ballot back in March that was suggesting that if merger didn't pass, then we should move forward with separation. But one of the caveats in there was that we maintain the police department. So from what I hear or have heard, it sounds like the police department is the most important thing that Essex Village residents want, or at least want to continue using moving forward. But what I haven't heard in watching select board meetings is their participation or willingness to have a discussion on that particular note. So I'm wondering if something is happening at the select board that is stalling out your conversations with them so that we can, again, try to move past these pieces, which are big pieces. Because if separation happens and there is no agreement, I believe that's a little over $2 million that would be lost out of the police budget automatically right out. Right. So what is your assessment of what's going on? Is the select board stalling? Is Andy Watts, the chair, stalling this? What is happening there?
You know, I'm not going to speak ill of another board or another board member. And so please, I hope that none of my comments are taken in that vein. What I will say is, you know, that separation referendum or separation advisory vote was not one of these close votes we've had in the past, whereas these previous merger attempts failed by, 20, 25 votes. It was very close. This advisory vote on separation passed by 76% of our community saying, yes, should merger fail, this is where we need to go next. And that, yes, police is the only thing that the community was interested in sharing. So with where we are in the conversations, I mean, we had a meeting last Tuesday. At the end of the meeting, one of the things the select board was to determine is, to help set the agenda for the next meeting, which would be tonight. After that executive session, because that's where they had that conversation, I got an email that no, the select board determined not to meet with us, that the meeting was not necessary. In a follow-up conversation email conversation with Andy, the rationale was that meeting tonight would not have had value because they have not had much time to process, as a board individually, to process our proposals. And granted, we made 12 proposals about things to share and or the timeline for separation. So with whether they're stalling or not, I mean, there are quotes back from April about how the select board is not going to prioritize the village separation efforts and that the select board is going to prioritize town business. So in some ways, it certainly feels like there's stalling going on. I will say I believe the select board has had 2, maybe 3 executive session conversations, which nobody in the public has any idea what those have been. Yeah. I don't know if they're working on counter proposals. I hope so. But we're all left to assume at this point because we don't really know. And I would say that in many respects as to why there is stalling, back in September, there was a request from residents to the town's finance director, who was also the finance director for the village, to cost out what separation would mean to village residents and to town outside the village residents. Long story short, what her analysis found, and keep in mind, this is a very professional member of the community who is the chair of finance directors throughout the state of Vermont's association, is that those inside the village would have their taxes go down by about 10 to 14%, but those outside the village would see a tax increase ranging from 19 to 51%, depending on how much is shared. So as a town select board, I could understand, well, if we do delay, then that means we don't have, hopefully, that we wouldn't get hit with such a big tax increase through this.
Right. Boy, that takes me to a whole nother place that will take us for another hour and a half. But let me stop there and just ask you this question. Because if the town decides it doesn't want to negotiate or it stalls, you have a timeline right now based on that referendum back in March to get something to the voters. Not that you have to, because that was an advisory, but you have taken it on for that timeline in order to get something on a ballot that we could vote on as village residents in November. So in order to move this thing along, if they're going to delay and stall out, what are your other options for police services?
So what I would say is, the more that our two boards can talk, the more opportunities we have to come to some level of agreement, whereas the less opportunity we have to talk, the more we're going to, as a board of trustees, we're going to go out and figure out the problems on our own. So what I would say is the more we do this on our own, the more likely we are to pursue other options. Do we have to contract with police services for the town of Essex? We don't. That referendum, as you said, it is an advisory vote. So no, we don't have to follow it to the letter. We already aren't in some regards. We're already looking to share some other services, such as the senior services, such as having access to Indian Brook. Those are things that were not included in this advisory vote, but we believe is in the best interest for the community. But if we're not able to have those conversations with the select board, we'll go off on our own. One of the big things that I want to make sure is known, there's some concern, or I would say there's some misinformation that the town provides the bulk of services to the village, and that separation would harm the village. And frankly, it's a bold-faced lie to say that. Yes, we have a shared police department that would cost the village money to either create our own, or we would be giving up money through the bonds that we've approved of by building that new facility if we end up going with another department, the state police, what have you. But the reason why village taxes are going to go down in separation is because of the duplication that we pay for. If we look at the manager position, for instance, we currently pay half of the individual's salary to help compensate.
Right.
The town picks up the benefits. The thing to keep in mind is we also pay 42% of everything that the town pays for. So we're paying over 70% of what it costs to have the manager, but yet we're receiving half of the benefits through the village. And that is just continuously demonstrated through departments like the town's park and recreation department. We have our own, and we pay 42% of theirs.
Yeah.
So this subsidizing of the town outside the village's taxes and saying that we as a village would be worse off through separation is just a bold-faced lie that is honestly quite frustrating.
So you brought up Evan Teach, who is the town manager and the village trustee manager as well, or the village manager. He does play two roles. He has a responsibility to both entities, and with that, does he have too many conflicts to be the person in the middle to help mediate? Because there is some mediation that's happening, I think, in his role between the two bodies. Because for him to try to, and I don't even know if it's within his authority, to try to push or encourage the town to participate more, to get through these particular agreements that need to be done, or whether or not it's working with the trustees to try to improve that timeline so that everybody can have what they need to really consider these particular issues. Do you think it might be time that a third-party mediator is brought into this process and not continue to use staff in order to try to navigate these negotiations?
I hear that, and in some regards, I do agree with that. With that said, Evan Teach is an absolute professional.
Yeah.
He has been doing municipal management for longer than I think he would want me to admit on air, so I won't go there. But really, it's one of the reasons why on the village's side, we've had our Parks and Recreation Director, Brad Luck, who's a longtime Parks and Recreation Director, grew up in Essex, and really knows the community well, and is also a good manager, understands municipal governance pretty well. And so he's been helping us in the village go through this process. Now, whether we need to have a mediator, though, honestly, that ship sailed. That ship has gone.
Okay.
It would add the additional time that it would take to have a joint RFP with the select board to then have the RFP go out, get the responses in, evaluate the responses. We'd find ourselves in September when the select board is already having these listening sessions to try and figure out what to do in this interim time period, where we're now not going to meet with them until the end of August, as they're going to go out and have these listening sessions about what they should do next, instead of, making the decisions on their own, which they are fully empowered to do as a municipal board.
So what are your let's be clear, what are the deadlines that you have in order to deliver of ballot item for November?
Yep.
When do we need to have all of this worked out?
So by October 10th October 12th is the last meeting that we in the village will have on this issue to finalize a charter and put it out to vote. That technical deadline is October 13th, but we only have until early October. And so we now have 3 meetings with the town select board to iron out these differences and come to some level of agreement, not even just in spirit, but also through finalizing and approving of these contracts. That's going to take some time, and I've remained worried that we're ever going to get to that point, which is why I requested that we meet more frequently than we are.
Yeah.
And now one of those meetings got taken away. That was just put on the week prior. So that deadline is fast approaching. And I can imagine if I were, say a resident in Montpelier or Johnson listening to this, wondering why does this really matter to me? Frankly, it's because it comes down to a community rights issue. As we are a state where everything that we do has to be approved of by the state's legislature, we need to make sure that as we're going down this path, which hasn't happened in over 100 years, that we have this well-documented and replicable process where what a community wants can actually happen. As we've seen again with that advisory vote with over 76% of the community saying, yes, this is what we want, should that be replicated again through the vote in November, to then have it kicked back from the legislature, which happened in 1999 in large respects because the select board at the time put forward a counter proposal for a merger after we already had that vote to separate. So to have this continued back and forth, since we can't just do what our residents are asking us to do, is just quite the frustrating process. And so we need to make sure that our communities have the rights to do what we need to do based on the best interests of our community.
Do you think right now, because right now what I hear on the ground, being a village resident and going around the village and then going into the town, there's still a lot of animosity, a lot of anger still hanging there from merger. What do you think is it going to take? Do you think separation will be the moment when we can start to heal, or something else is necessary?
I think that it is, and I say that because if we look back at every single merger attempt, at no point in time have a majority of village residents or town outside the village residents ever wanted it. And that coin has flipped over the years. At one point in time, the town wanted it and the village didn't. Now the village wants it, the town doesn't. You can't really create a community when there isn't that agreement. So moving forward through separation, what it does is it allows us to be equals at the table. How I mentioned previously with the inability to meet with the community on the policing issues and racial equity, to be basically told we are not equals at the table is unfair and disrespectful to our community. Whereas in a separate community, we would be the exact same. We would have those opportunities as peers to just come together and figure out what we can do best for each other.
When it comes down to the village residents that you're working with directly, do you feel this kind of getting this merger fatigue of this has just gone on so long that I just kind of don't care about it anymore? I just want to get it over with. Do you feel that that's a prevailing attitude of any of the residents?
We certainly heard that going through the merger proposals and going through that process, as well as in separation, what feels like a lot of weight being lifted off of residents is what I've heard, off of their shoulders, is that finally this feels like something that we do have some power and authority to do ourselves, and that we don't need another entity or we don't need another part of the community at the table. This is something that we can do for our best interests by ourselves. And so it's frankly, quite an exciting and joyful moment to be going through this. I've seen a lot of excitement from residents who are really just ecstatic that we're going through this process to really allow us to be autonomous and to be the masters of our own destiny.
So let me ask Andrew, we've only got a couple minutes left, but looking at what you need to get done, what are the top priorities right now for the trustees that you need to work through? What are the meaty issues that you've got to grind out here in the next few weeks? Frankly,
The biggest thing we need to iron out is police services. Whether that's with the town of Essex or not, we need to get that finalized. I can't imagine being a member of the community and being asked to vote on separation where if I call 911, I don't know who's coming to my door. I'd want to know that. And so we absolutely need to get that done, and we need to get that done by October. So that's the first and highest priority, is figuring that portion out.
Are you confident that even if, for whatever reason, if the town select board is stalling or whatever they're doing and does not move this thing forward in a way that moves it to be able to hit that deadline, are you confident that you can work either with another community or maybe with the state police in order to get this done on time?
I'm confident that we can figure something out, yes, to ensure that when separation day one comes, if a village resident calls 911, that there is a police response that is absolutely appropriate for the response that's necessary.
And as far as other priorities that you have for the village in order to hit these deadlines?
Everything else can frankly be internal. If we're not able to do things like sharing, let's just say, sharing senior services, we have the building. We can hire the staff to do it. When it comes to things like Indian Brook access, sure, it'd be great to have that as some type of chartered resident right. But frankly, right now, Indian Brook Reservoir is open to any resident, regardless of where you live. You can have non-resident access now for the first time in quite a long time. So I'm not too worried about it personally. And everything else that we're trying to have some level of agreement with the select board with, we don't need it. We don't need to have them move forward.
We're out of time, but let me ask you this one last question, because if people are interested in getting this information, where can they get it?
So if you go to the village website at essexjunction.org, you can get a lot, but there's also a fantastic resident-driven group, Our Village, Our Voices, who is really helping to share this message with the community. So if you look up Our Village, Our Voices, you will be able to find a lot of opportunities to engage in this process. We just had a fantastic pool party the other day.
Heard about 100 people showed up.
It was amazing. It really was. Nothing but village residents to be able to just talk and live and be as villagers, but also being able to hear what's going on through separation. So the Our Village, Our Voices is also another great opportunity to hear what's going on. And I think it's Wednesday night we're going to be having a village trivia over at Firebird.
I think that's gotten postponed, actually. But there is a lot of events that I'm aware of. You just have to check out the website for the dates and details.
Thank you for that, Marcus.
Yeah, no problem. But when's the next trustee meeting?
Tomorrow night, Tuesday night, 6:30.
So you can get all that information at essexjunction.org. Get all that information and participate and find out what's happening in the village. Andrew Brown, thank you so much for coming in.
Marcus, Jamie, thank you so much.